This is just a little tutorial to help you with the plate tectonics lab. So you'll have to view this page, which is just an intro to tell you what you're going to do today or in this lab. And then there's a little review. So in your lecture portion, you're going to cover a lot of this information. And so even in the previous lectures, we talked about interior of the Earth, but it is all related. So a little reminder about some interior of the Earth stuff, and then of course some information and reminders about the different boundaries that you'll need to know in order to complete the lab. And so when you come to the lab, it is suggested that you watch the video you're watching to help you with completing the lab. So I'm going to preview this here for you. And so you'll need that Earth's fractured surface map. So you could do it a couple ways. It's a PDF, so when you click it, it'll ask you to download it. And it'll show up either in your web browser as a little PDF viewer that you have in your browser. And so if that's the case, you should have this plus and minus. And so you can zoom in, and then you'll just have to use the scroll bars on the side to kind of manipulate and move around. If you have a PDF viewer, you can zoom in, of course, with this little plus, and you can use this hand to kind of just drag it around. Or, of course, you can still use the scroll bars on the side to move around and manipulate the map. So either one that you use will work. And so when you come into here, it's going to just ask you some questions about the map. So you obviously want to have it up. It's going to ask you about some keys, the legend, what do some of these things mean. So you'll want to make sure you check those out. And if we look really fast at our map here, there's a couple keys here. And so they're kind of scattered about. There's a little bit of a key over here that gives you some information about what the symbols represent. And so if you can't read those, of course, like I said, we can zoom in a little bit and then scroll back down so you can take a look at what those mean. And then if you come over to the other side, you should see that there's some more information about some of the symbols, so you want to make sure you take a look at that. So those two places are where you'll find some information about what the symbols mean and how to interpret those. And then throughout here, there's some general questions, of course, about plate tectonics. Some you may know just from taking the information from the lecture and things like that. Others, of course, it's specific to the map, so you'll want to locate those. And so if you come up here, it's asking about strike-slip boundaries, hotspots, what do they mean? Hawaii, in case you're unaware, so sometimes it's hard to, there's no search on here, unfortunately. But if we kind of move around just to help you out here, so where do we have Hawaii is kind of sitting right here. This is Hawaii. So here's North American plate, right? We're sitting about here in Arizona. So off in the Pacific Ocean is Hawaii. So you can take a look at that to answer that question. And then it's going to ask you to look at some of these images and match up what type of boundary we see here. So that's not too bad. It's going to ask you some questions about where do we find deep and shallow earthquakes, right? So this is important when we talk about subduction and what's fracturing or breaking during an earthquake. Remember, only the lithosphere can break and fracture, and that's where earthquakes occur. And so without subduction, we can't get very deep earthquakes because the thickness of the lithosphere is only so thick. Maybe up to 100, maybe 150 kilometers thick, but we get deeper than that. We get up to 500 kilometers. How does that happen? It's only because during subduction we push down a brittle lithosphere deep into the mantle, and that is still brittle as it descends and it can break, right? So some conceptual things about where we get volcanism, where we get earthquakes. The Nazca Plate, once again, let me help you out. So the Nazca Plate is off of South America here. So if we drop down, here's the Nazca Plate. Here's the South American plate. So you can answer some questions about that. What else? Okay, so on the western edge, we can jump up and do that, right? So the western edge of the U.S., hopefully we can find that, right? So up here, here's the Juan de Fuca Plate, so we can look at that. Where else? The Indian Plate, just north of Delhi, so we want to jump over to the Indian Plate, which is over here to the west. And let's see, where am I at here? So here's the Eurasian plate up here. Here's the Indian plate. So we can look at what's happening in that location. Back to Hawaii, more Hawaii stuff. And so the other thing that it's going to ask you a couple questions about is certain earthquakes and what's occurred for the death toll for some. So in the upper right-hand corner, you'll see that there are some notable earthquakes and some notable volcanoes that have erupted. And so these are ones that have impacted society in a profound way. And they're numbered. The circles are earthquakes, the squares are volcanoes. So it asks you a few questions about, how many deaths occurred. You're just kind of reading off some of these. If it asks you to find them, go find southern Alaska and see where it's located, and then interpret the type of boundary. If it asks you a question like that, just remember there are circles and squares. So if you're going to one, make sure if it's an earthquake, it's San Francisco, and you're not over here, somewhere else, okay? And then finally, if I remember right, as we come down here, we're going to do a few rate questions. So rates are just, we want to determine how fast the plates are moving over geologic time. And so I know math isn't always people's favorite topic. So there's a little tutorial here that helps you work through some of the questions that remain in the lab. There are things we have to do like conversions. We have to convert from kilometers to centimeters. So there's a conversion factor here, and I walk you through it in this little tutorial about rates. So if you're struggling with that, take a quick peek at that so that you can do the math and figure out what's happening in these couple questions toward the end here. So other than that, those tips should help you get through the lab fairly quickly. And as always, if you have any questions or concerns, please don't hesitate to drop me an email, and I will get back to you as soon as I can. Okay.